All right, so, we always ask you to send us stuff that catches your eye. And this week, well, this week you really came through.
Oh, yeah.
Someone sent us a piece, and the title alone, it grabs you right away. It's from Fabrizio Ciancio on www.italianradioinflorida.com.
Okay.
And it's called Podcast Episode. Russia is the new COVID.
Wow. Okay, so right off the bat,
Yeah.
we know this is going to be interesting.
It's going to be a spicy one. And, we always say we want to understand other people's viewpoints, even if they're different from our own.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into this and see what Mr. Ciancio has to say.
Yeah, let's break it down.
On his platform there.
Exactly.
So when we're looking at this piece, the main thing that jumps out is obviously that title, Russia is the new COVID.
Right, front and center.
So what do you think he's getting at with that comparison?
Well, I think it's really important to remember, Ciancio is sharing his own specific viewpoint here.
Of course.
And it's on a very complex situation, the whole geopolitical landscape involving Europe and Russia.
Right. We're not talking about, baking a cake here.
Exactly. This is some serious stuff.
This is world events.
And we're not here to say whether we agree or disagree with him.
Yeah, we're not taking sides.
We're just trying to understand his argument,
His perspective.
What's he thinking? How did he get there?
Exactly. So that's our mission today, to kind of unpack what he's saying in this piece.
Right.
Give you, the listener, the tools to understand his perspective.
Exactly. And then you can decide for yourself whether you want to go and explore his work further.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's dig into the central analogy.
Okay.
He says, Russia is the new COVID. What's at the heart of that?
Well, he's using this analogy to really frame the entire situation as he sees it.
Okay.
He's saying that Europe's reaction to Russia is basically mirroring how everyone reacted to the pandemic.
Like the fear of the lockdowns?
Yeah, all of that. He's saying there's this narrative being pushed.
By who, though?
He uses this term suppressive forces.
Okay.
Which is a little vague, I'll grant you that. But the idea is that there's this kind of exaggerated sense of danger. And that's leading to this overreaction,
So instead of looking at Russia as like, a country with its own interests and its own,
its own complexities.
Yeah, he's saying it's being painted as this big, scary threat.
Right, like it's this existential danger like the virus was.
And he's saying Europe's response is driven by that fear.
Exactly. And that's a really key takeaway here because he's setting the stage for his whole argument.
Right. He's saying Europe's not reacting in a calm or measured way.
It's more like a panic.
Like a knee-jerk reaction.
Right. And that's a problem for him.
Okay, so if that's his framework,
Yeah.
what specific actions is he talking about?
Well, he points to things like Europe sending weapons, military support, financial aid.
Okay.
And even though he doesn't explicitly say Ukraine in this particular piece, it's pretty clear that that's where the support is going.
Right.
And he goes so far as to say it feels like Europe has pretty much declared war on Russia, even without like an official declaration.
So he's seeing these actions as a serious escalation.
Absolutely. He's saying this is a really dangerous path.
And that brings us to the motives, right? Because if Europe is reacting this way, what's the reason? Is Russia really this big threat that needs this kind of response?
Well, he addresses this head on.
Yeah.
He brings up the idea that Russia wants to expand into Europe.
Right, which is a common narrative you hear.
Exactly, but he's not buying it, at least not without some solid evidence.
What does he mean by that?
He's saying he wants to see black on white proof.
Hard facts?
Not just stories or speculation.
Now show me the receipts.
Exactly, and I think that's a fair point,
Of course, we should always be questioning things.
Absolutely, and especially when it comes to something as serious as war.
Right. Lives are at stake.
So he's urging caution. He's saying, don't just believe everything you hear, look for the evidence.
And that skepticism also seems to influence how he views the whole balance of power.
Right, because if you think about it, if Russia isn't really this expansionist threat, then Europe's reaction seems even more out of proportion.
Especially considering what he says about Russia's military strength.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't mince words there.
He does not.
He flat out says that Russia is stronger, more prepared, and more dangerous than all of Europe combined.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
It is, and he even goes a step further and suggests that in some ways, Russia might be ahead of the U.S. militarily, too.
Seriously.
So that's what he's saying, and that assessment is really important because it feeds into his whole argument about the potential consequences.
Right. If Europe is underestimating Russia's power, then this could backfire badly.
Exactly, and he's clearly worried about that.
Okay, so let's talk about those consequences then.
All right.
How does he see this playing out? He keeps mentioning retaliation.
Well, he lays out this pretty straightforward strategic argument.
Okay.
He says if Europe keeps pushing Russia, with the military buildup, the sanctions,
Yeah.
Russia's going to respond. It's inevitable. And he even says that Russia might launch a preemptive strike.
Whoa, like attack first.
Yeah, he's saying if Russia feels threatened and they think they have the upper hand,
They go for it.
it's like he says strategy 101. You don't poke a bear unless you're ready for it to come at you.
And he compares it to a scrawny kid picking a fight with a heavyweight champion.
Right. It's a pretty vivid analogy.
It is. It paints a picture.
And it really underscores his point that this approach is reckless.
So he's saying Europe's actions are not only based on a flawed premise,
Right.
but they're also incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely. And this is where he brings in this idea of real common sense.
Right, because he keeps saying the current approach lacks that.
And it's important to understand what he means by that because it's not just your everyday common sense.
Yeah, he actually defines it very specifically.
He does. He's got a whole philosophy around it.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's real common sense according to Ciancia?
So for him, it's about making decisions that lead to the greatest survival.
Survival in what sense?
Well, he defines it broadly. It's not just about avoiding war.
Oh.
He's talking about improving quality of life, having abundance for people, taking care of the environment, even the spiritual aspect of humanity.
Wow, so it's like this holistic vision of a thriving society.
Exactly. And he emphasizes simplicity, sustainability, thinking long term.
Not just quick fixes.
Right. He's looking at the big picture.
So when he says Europe lacks real common sense, he's saying they're not considering these wider consequences.
Right. They're focused on this immediate perceived threat.
But not the long-term well-being of everyone involved.
Exactly. And he highlights the negative impact on millions of people, Europeans, Russians, families.
Everyone gets caught in the crossfire.
And he's saying there are actually people who benefit from this situation.
Interesting. Who's he talking about?
He points the finger at the arms industry and big corporations.
The military-industrial complex.
Basically. And he uses the example of weapons companies. Their stock prices have gone through the roof.
Profiteering from war.
Exactly. He calls it insane that they're getting these huge returns while everyone else suffers.
And who's he saying is suffering the most?
Well, he says it's the everyday citizens,
Of course.
He talks about this $800 billion that's being spent, and he says that money's going to come from somewhere.
Right. It's got to come from somewhere.
And he believes it's going to mean cuts to essential services.
Like what?
Healthcare, pensions, education, things like that.
So he's saying that people are paying the price.
Both literally and figuratively.
And he even names names, right?
He does. He singles out Ursula von der Leyen.
Okay. And who is she again?
She's a key figure in the European Union.
Right.
And Ciancio specifically encourages his listeners to do their research on her, look into her background, her values, her connections.
Particularly with Germany, France, the UK.
Right. He's implying that by understanding her motivations, we can better understand why Europe is taking this approach towards Russia.
It's like he's saying, follow the money, follow the power.
Exactly. And that ties into his whole point about knowledge is freedom.
Right. Because he ends his piece with that powerful statement.
And he really emphasizes the importance of understanding who's pulling the strings.
Who's making the decisions?
Exactly, because he doesn't believe these decision makers are always acting in the best interests of the people. He thinks they're often serving old alliances and a powerful few.
So he's urging people to educate themselves, to see through the propaganda.
To become more informed citizens.
And to ultimately take action.
Because despite the pretty bleak picture he paints, he does end on a hopeful note.
Okay, what's his message there?
He's calling on everyday people, Italians, Europeans, everyone to wake up and come together.
To say no to war.
Exactly, and to demand real common sense.
So he's acknowledging that individuals might feel powerless.
But he believes that collective action can make a difference.
People power.
Right, that's his hope.
So to sum it all up, Ciancio's central argument is that Europe's approach to Russia is basically a huge overreaction.
Driven by fear and a false narrative.
And that this approach benefits the powerful at the expense of everyone else.
And that it completely lacks what he calls real common sense.
Which is this broader, more holistic vision of well-being.
Exactly. It's a pretty scathing critique.
It is, and it definitely gives us a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
So for you, the listener, as you reflect on Ciancio's perspective, we want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
When it comes to international conflicts, how much of what we believe is shaped by the media, the politicians, the people in power? How can we learn to see through those narratives and understand the real motivations behind these global events?
That's a tough one.
It is, but it's a question worth asking.
For sure.
And finally, what does real common sense look like in these complex situations?
What does it actually mean to act in the best interests of humanity and the planet?
Big questions. No easy answers.
But definitely worth exploring.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Fabrizio Ciancio's perspective.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
We encourage you to check out his work on www.italianradioinflorida.com.
And as always, do your own research. Form your own opinions.
Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.